Picture this. You're sipping morning coffee, gazing at your pristine backyard pool, your slice of paradise when you spot wet footprints leading from your gate to your pool deck. Strangers have been swimming in your pool while you slept. This isn't just about trespassing. This is about respect boundaries and what happens when ordinary people are pushed too far. I'm about to tell you the incredible true story of Tasha Williams, a woman who turned neighborhood bullies into her biggest mistake. Comment your city below so I can see how far this story travels, because what Tasha did next will shock you. Tasha Williams had always believed that home was supposed to be your sanctuary. At 42 years old, she'd worked 2 jobs for 15 years to afford her modest 3-bedroom house in Phoenix, Arizona. The crown jewel of her property wasn't the house itself. It was the sparkling blue swimming pool in her backyard, surrounded by carefully maintained desert landscaping and a privacy fence she'd installed herself. Every morning, Tasha would step onto her back patio with her coffee, watching the early Arizona sun dance across the water's surface. It was her meditation, her peace, her reward for all those double shifts at the hospital where she worked as a nurse. The pool wasn't just a luxury. It was her therapy after dealing with difficult patients and demanding doctors all day. But on Tuesday morning, June 15th, that peace shattered like glass hitting concrete. "What the hell?" Tasha muttered, setting down her coffee mug so hard it rattled against the patio table. There, clear as day, were wet footprints across her pristine pool deck. Not just one set, multiple sets leading from her side gate directly to the pool's edge. Her pool skimmer was floating upside down, and there was a crumpled energy drink can sitting on her poolside chair. Tasha's heart hammered as she walked closer, her bare feet stepping carefully around the evidence. The gate latch was broken, hanging loose like a broken promise. Someone had forced their way into her backyard and used her pool like it was a public swimming facility. "This has got to be a mistake," she whispered, even though the evidence screamed otherwise. She grabbed the energy drink can, reading the label, Monster Energy, Ultra Paradise. The metal was still cold. Whoever had been here hadn't left long ago. Her skin crawled at the thought of strangers splashing around in her pool while she slept just 50 feet away. Tasha spent the next hour cleaning up the mess her anger building with each wet towel print on her deck furniture. She checked her security. The motion lights she'd installed last year were still working, but they only covered the front of the house. Her backyard was a blind spot, something she'd never considered a problem until now. Maybe it was just kids, she told herself, trying to rationalize the violation. Kids being stupid. But even as she said it, doubt gnawed at her stomach. The footprints were too big to belong to children. These were adult-sized prints, and there were at least 4 different sets. That evening, Tasha decided to stay up late, positioning herself by her bedroom window that overlooked the backyard. She turned off all the lights and waited, her eyes adjusting to the darkness. The pool's underwater lighting cast an eerie blue glow across the yard, and every shadow seemed to move with potential threat. At 11:47 p.m., her vigilance paid off. The side gate creaked open, and 3 figures slipped into her yard like they owned the place. Tasha's breath caught in her throat as she watched 2 women and 1 man, all appearing to be in their 20s, casually stroll toward her pool. One of the women was already peeling off her shirt. "Oh, hell no!" Tasha whispered, her nurse training kicking in as adrenaline flooded her system. She grabbed her phone and rushed outside, her footsteps loud enough to alert the trespassers. The 3 strangers froze like deer in headlights, the woman still holding her shirt half over her head. "Excuse me," Tasha called out, her voice carrying the authority she used with unruly patience. "What exactly do you think you're doing?" The man, tall with sleeve tattoos and a cocky grin, had the audacity to look annoyed by her interruption. "Oh, come on, lady. We're not hurting anything. It's just a quick swim." "Just a quick swim," Tasha repeated, her voice rising. "In my pool, on my property." The second woman, a blonde with obvious extensions, rolled her eyes dramatically. "It's not like you were using it. All the lights were off in your house." Tasha felt her blood pressure spike. "I wasn't using it because I was sleeping," like normal people do at midnight. This is private property. You're trespassing. Look, we'll be out in like 30 minutes, the tattooed man said as if he was doing her a favor. We live in the apartment complex over there. He gestured vaguely toward the fence line. And our pool's been broken for weeks. We're not stealing anything. You're stealing my peace of mind, Tasha shot back. And you're stealing my right to enjoy my own property without worrying about strangers breaking in. The blonde woman scoffed. You're being really dramatic about this. It's just water. That comment hit Tasha like a slap. Just water. This pool represented years of overtime shifts, sacrificed weekends, and careful budgeting. Every chlorine tablet, every repair, every insurance payment, it all came from her hard work. Get out, Tasha said, her voice deadly calm. Get out now or I'm calling the police. The three exchanged glances, and for a moment Tasha thought they might actually leave peacefully. Instead, the man shrugged and started unbuttoning his shorts. Come on, just let us swim for a bit. What's the big deal? You've got this huge pool and you live here alone. Share the wealth. Tasha couldn't believe what she was hearing. Share the wealth? Are you insane? This isn't a community pool. She pulled out her phone and started dialing 911, but the tattooed man just laughed. By the time the cops get here, we'll be gone. And good luck proving we were ever here. He was right, and they all knew it. The police response time in this neighborhood was notoriously slow for non-emergency calls, and trespassing was hardly considered urgent when no one was in physical danger. But Tasha wasn't backing down. I have cameras, she lied smoothly, hoping they wouldn't call her bluff. That gave them pause. The three huddled together, whispering urgently. Finally, the blonde woman stepped forward. Fine, whatever. You're being totally unreasonable, but we'll leave. This time. This time, Tasha repeated. There better not be a next time. The woman smirked. Well, that depends on how nice you are about it, doesn't it? The threat hung in the air like smoke as the three trespassers gathered their things and sauntered toward the gate. They moved slowly, deliberately, making it clear they weren't intimidated. The man even had the nerve to dip his hand in the pool as he passed by. Nice pool, he called over his shoulder. Really nice. After they left, Tasha stood alone in her backyard, shaking with a mixture of adrenaline and rage. The casual entitlement they displayed was staggering. They genuinely believed they had some kind of right to use her property, and their parting words suggested this wasn't over. The next morning, Tasha called in sick to work for the first time in 2 years. She spent the day at Home Depot purchasing a stronger lock for her gate and researching security cameras online. The salesperson, a helpful man named Rick, listened to her story with growing concern. You know, ma'am, I hate to say this, but if they're bold enough to argue with you face to face, they're probably going to come back, Rick said, ringing up her purchases. People like that they see backing down as weakness. What do you suggest? Tasha asked. Well, legally speaking, you've got every right to protect your property. Cameras are good, they'll definitely help if you need to press charges. But you might want to think about motion sensors, maybe some lighting back there. That afternoon, Tasha installed her new lock and set up a basic security camera system she'd ordered for next-day delivery. It wasn't professional grade, but it would record anyone who entered her backyard. She also bought a laminated sign from the hardware store. Private property, no trespassing. Violators will be prosecuted. For 3 days, everything seemed normal. Tasha began to hope that her confrontation had solved the problem. Maybe the trespassers had found somewhere else to swim, or maybe they'd respected her boundaries after all. On Saturday night, that hope died. Tasha was awakened at 1:30 a.m. by the sound of splashing and laughter. Not just a few people this time, it sounded like a party. She crept to her window and couldn't believe what she saw. 7 people were in and around her pool, 3 in the water, 4 sitting on her pool deck furniture, and someone had brought a Bluetooth speaker that was pumping out music loud enough to wake the neighbors. There were beer bottles lined up on her poolside table, and someone had dragged her garden hose over to create an impromptu slip and slide on her grass. "This is unbelievable," Tasha whispered, grabbing her phone to record the scene. But as she focused the camera, she noticed something that made her blood run cold. One of the people at her pool was her next-door neighbor, Sandra Mitchell. Sandra, the 40-something woman, who always complained about Tasha's lawn care schedule and had once called the HOA about Tasha's excessive Christmas decorations. Sandra was sitting on Tasha's pool chair, drink in hand, laughing at something one of the strangers had said. She looked completely at home, like she belonged there. Tasha didn't bother with warnings this time. She called 911 immediately. 911, what's your emergency? I have multiple people trespassing on my property, using my swimming pool without permission. This is the second time this week. Are you in immediate danger, ma'am? No, but they're destroying my property and we'll send an officer when one becomes available. Please stay inside and avoid confrontation. Tasha hung up frustrated. She knew when one becomes available could mean hours, and by then the trespassers would be long gone. But she wasn't going to hide in her own house while strangers partied in her backyard. She got dressed quickly and marched outside her phone ready to record everything. "Excuse me!" she shouted over the music. The party stopped like someone had hit a pause button. 7 faces turned toward her, ranging from guilty to defiant. Sandra actually had the nerve to wave. "Oh hey, Tasha, great pool you've got here." "Sandra." Tasha said, her voice tight with controlled fury. "What are you doing in my backyard?" Sandra looked genuinely confused by the question. "Well, these nice kids from the apartment complex mentioned they'd been swimming here, and I thought it would be fun to join them. You never use this pool anyway." "I never use it. I'm sorry. Are you watching my house? Keeping track of my pool usage?" One of the younger men, different from the first group, but just as entitled, spoke up. "Look, lady, there's plenty of room for everyone. Why are you being so selfish about this?" Selfish. The word hit Tasha like a physical blow. She was being called selfish for wanting to control access to her own property. "Because it's my pool," she exploded. "I paid for it. I maintain it. I pay the insurance on it. You can't just decide to use someone else's property because you feel like it." Sandra stood up, swaying slightly from whatever she'd been drinking. "Oh, come on, Tasha. Don't be such a stick in the mud. It's summer. We're all neighbors, and sharing is caring." "Sharing is caring," Tasha repeated incredulously. "Sandra, when have you ever shared anything with me? When I had the flu last year and couldn't get groceries, did you offer to help? When my car broke down, did you offer a ride? But now you want to share my pool." The group exchanged uncomfortable glances. Tasha could see they hadn't expected this level of resistance. They'd probably been told she was a pushover, someone who could be easily intimidated or guilted into compliance. "The police are on their way," Tasha announced loudly. This time the reaction was different. The younger crowd immediately started gathering their things, but Sandra just laughed. "The police? Really, Tasha? You're going to call the cops on your neighbors for having a little fun?" "You're not having fun in your yard, Sandra. You're having fun in mine, without permission." As if on cue, Tasha's phone buzzed with a notification from her new security camera app. She glanced at the screen and saw the footage from earlier in the evening. Clear video of Sandra leading the group through Tasha's gate, Sandra helping herself to drinks from someone's cooler, Sandra lounging in Tasha's chair like she owned the place. "I have everything on camera," Tasha said, holding up her phone. "All of you trespassing on private property." That finally got Sandra's attention. Her confident smirk faltered as she processed the implications. "You're recording us?" "I'm recording people who broke into my backyard and are using my pool without permission. Which, by the way, is exactly what I'm supposed to do when people trespass on my property." The group was moving faster now, gathering drinks and towels, but Sandra wasn't ready to back down completely. "This is ridiculous, Tasha. We're not hurting anything. You're just being vindictive because you don't have any friends to invite over." The personal attack stung, but Tasha refused to take the bait. "The only thing ridiculous here is thinking you have the right to use someone else's property whenever you feel like it." As the trespassers filed out through her gate, Sandra stopped and turned back. "You know what, fine. Keep your precious pool, but don't expect any neighborly favors from me anymore." Tasha almost laughed. "What favors, Sandra? In the 3 years you've lived next door, what favors have you ever done for me?" Sandra didn't have an answer for that. She just turned and stormed off, leaving Tasha alone in her backyard with the evidence of their uninvited party scattered around her pool. The police never showed up that night. When Tasha called the next morning to follow up, she was told that the responding officer had been diverted to a domestic violence call, and by the time he could have responded to her address, the incident was over. "So, what am I supposed to do the next time this happens?" Tasha asked the desk sergeant. "Well, ma'am, if they're not threatening you or damaging your property, it's really more of a civil matter. You could consider posting no trespassing signs or improving your security." Tasha hung up feeling more frustrated than ever. The system was essentially telling her that protecting her property was her responsibility, but the tools available to her were limited. That's when she decided that if the authorities couldn't help her, she'd have to help herself. The next few days were quiet, but Tasha knew it was just the calm before the storm. She'd seen the look in Sandra's eyes during their confrontation. This wasn't over. If anything, Tasha's resistance had only made her neighbor more determined to prove some kind of point. On Wednesday evening, Tasha was proven right. This time, she was ready. She'd spent the weekend upgrading her security system and researching property law. She'd also discovered something interesting. Her homeowner's insurance policy included liability coverage for her pool, but it explicitly excluded coverage for unauthorized users. If someone got hurt in her pool without permission, she could potentially be sued, but her insurance wouldn't protect her. That knowledge transformed her anger into something sharper and more focused. This wasn't just about privacy anymore. It was about protecting herself from financial ruin. When the splashing started at 2 a.m. on Wednesday night, Tasha was ready. She'd been monitoring her security cameras from her bedroom, and she'd watched Sandra and an even larger group approach her fence around 1:45 a.m. This time, they'd brought pool floats. Pool floats. They'd actually brought pool floats to her house like they were planning an extended swimming session. Tasha didn't call 911 this time. Instead, she grabbed her phone, her camera, and a flashlight and headed outside to document everything. She wanted irrefutable evidence of what was happening before she escalated the situation. What she found in her backyard defied belief. 12 people were using her pool area like it was a private resort. Someone had set up a folding table with snacks and drinks. Multiple people had pool floats and were lounging in her pool like they were on vacation. Sandra was holding court from Tasha's best patio chair, telling some story that had everyone laughing. And then Tasha noticed the most infuriating detail of all. Someone had hung string lights around her pergola. They'd actually decorated her property for their unauthorized party. "What is this?" Tasha said loudly, her voice cutting through the conversation. The group turned toward her, and this time no one looked guilty. If anything, they looked annoyed that she was interrupting their fun. Sandra stood up with exaggerated patience, like she was dealing with a difficult child. "Tasha, honey, we need to talk." "Honey." Tasha repeated, her voice dripping with disbelief. "Did you just call me honey while you're throwing a party in my backyard without my permission?" Sandra's smile never wavered, but something cold flickered in her eyes. "Look, I think we got off on the wrong foot the other night. These are my friends from the book club and some of the kids from the apartments. We were just thinking that maybe we could work out some kind of arrangement." "What kind of arrangement?" Tasha asked, though she had a sinking feeling she already knew where this was going. A woman Tasha didn't recognize, probably in her late 30s, with perfectly styled hair, despite being at a midnight pool party, stepped forward. "I'm Jennifer, Sandra's friend. We were thinking that maybe you'd be open to letting us use your pool a couple nights a week. You know, like a timeshare situation." Tasha stared at Jennifer like she'd just suggested they timeshare Tasha's bedroom. A timeshare situation. For my pool. That I own. Well, yes. Jennifer continued, apparently oblivious to Tasha's tone. We'd be very respectful about it. Maybe Tuesday and Thursday evenings and every other weekend. We could even help with maintenance costs. Help with maintenance costs? Tasha repeated slowly. You want to help pay to maintain my pool so you can use it whenever you want. Sandra jumped back in her voice, taking on that patronizing tone people use when they think they're being reasonable. It's really a win-win situation, Tasha. You get help with the expenses, and we get access to a beautiful pool. Plus, you wouldn't have to swim alone all the time. The implication hit Tasha like a punch to the gut. They'd been watching her keeping track of when she used her own pool, and they'd decided she was lonely enough to accept their ridiculous proposal. And what if I say no? Tasha asked. The group exchanged glances, and the temperature in the backyard seemed to drop 10 degrees. One of the younger men wearing board shorts and an entitled smirk spoke up. Well, I mean, we're already here, and it's not like you can stop us every single night. There it was. The threat was out in the open now. They weren't asking for permission, they were demanding access and offering to pay for the privilege. But the underlying message was clear: cooperate, or they'd keep coming anyway. Tasha felt something snap inside her chest. These people had crossed every boundary, violated her privacy, and now they were trying to extort her into giving them legal access to her property. Get out, she said quietly. Now, Tasha. Sandra started. Get out! Tasha roared, her voice echoing across the neighborhood. All of you get out of my yard right now! The volume and fury in her voice startled the group. Several people immediately started moving toward the gate, but Sandra held her ground. You're making a huge mistake, Sandra said, her friendly mask finally slipping completely. We were trying to be nice about this, but you're being completely unreasonable. I'm being unreasonable. Tasha laughed, but there was no humor in it. You broke into my yard, threw a party, decorated my property, and then tried to blackmail me into letting you keep doing it, and I'm being unreasonable. Jennifer, apparently the designated spokesperson, tried one more time. Look, we're all adults here. Surely we can come to some kind of understanding. The only understanding we need to come to is this. Tasha interrupted, pulling out her phone. I'm calling the police, and I'm filing trespassing charges against every single one of you. I have all your faces on camera, and I'm pressing charges this time. That finally got their attention. The casual entitlement evaporated as people realized there might actually be consequences for their actions. You can't prove we were doing anything wrong, Sandra said, but her voice lacked conviction. Tasha held up her phone, showing the live feed from her security cameras. I can prove you broke into my yard. I can prove you brought alcohol onto my property without permission. I can prove you damaged my property by hanging decorations without consent. And I can prove that you just threatened to continue trespassing if I didn't give you what you wanted. The group was moving faster now, gathering their pool floats and decorations. But as they reached the gate, Sandra turned back one more time. This isn't over, Tasha. You can't keep this pool all to yourself forever. People talk in this neighborhood, and everyone thinks you're being selfish. Let them talk, Tasha shot back. At least they'll be talking about someone who actually owns what she's protecting. After the trespassers left, Tasha stood in her backyard, surveying the damage. They'd left trash scattered around her pool deck, and someone had spilled what looked like sangria on her patio furniture. The string lights they'd hung were cheap, and had already started falling down, leaving small holes in her pergola where they'd been attached. But the physical damage wasn't what bothered her most. It was the realization that this had evolved beyond simple trespassing. Sandra and her friends had clearly been planning this arrangement for a while. They'd brought supplies coordinated with multiple people and developed what they thought was a reasonable proposal. They genuinely believed they had some kind of right to use her pool. The next morning, Tasha called in sick again and drove to the police station to file a formal complaint. The desk sergeant, a tired-looking woman named Officer Martinez, listened to her story with growing interest. "You said you have video of all this?" Martinez asked. "Multiple angles, clear faces, timestamps, the whole thing." And they actually proposed a timeshare arrangement. They called it that. Yes, they wanted to use my pool twice a week and every other weekend, and they wanted me to accept partial payment for maintenance in exchange. Officer Martinez shook her head. "I've been doing this for 15 years, and I've never heard anything quite like that. The audacity is incredible." "So you can do something about it?" "Absolutely. With video evidence, we can definitely press trespassing charges. The problem is going to be enforcement. These people clearly don't respect boundaries, and a court order might not be enough to stop them." "What do you suggest?" Martinez leaned forward, lowering her voice. "Off the record, you need to make it clear that you're not someone they want to mess with. Legal consequences are one thing, but people like this usually only understand consequences that affect them personally." "What kind of consequences?" "I can't give you specific advice on that, but I will say this: you have every right to protect your property within the bounds of the law, and sometimes the best defense is a good offense." Tasha left the police station with a formal complaint filed and a new perspective on her situation. The authorities could help her after the fact, but preventing future incidents was up to her. That afternoon, she drove to a different Home Depot across town and had a long conversation with a security specialist named Mike. Unlike the helpful salesperson from before, Mike had worked in loss prevention for years and understood the psychology of deterrence. "The problem you're dealing with is escalation," Mike explained as they walked through the security section. "These people started with simple trespassing, but now they're trying to legitimize their behavior. That's actually more dangerous than random break-ins because they're not planning to stop. So, what do I do? You need to make the cost of entry higher than the benefit they're getting. Right now, the worst thing that happens to them is you yell and they leave. They need to understand that coming onto your property will result in immediate unpleasant consequences." Mike showed her an upgraded security system with motion-activated alarms, better cameras with night vision, and something that caught her attention immediately: motion-activated sprinklers. "Sprinklers?" Tasha asked. "Best deterrent we sell for exactly your situation." Mike grinned. "They're designed for deer and other animals, but they work just as well on human pests. Motion sensor triggers a powerful spray of water. Completely harmless, but extremely effective. Nobody wants to get soaked, especially if they're carrying electronics or wearing nice clothes." Tasha could picture Sandra and her book club friends getting blasted with water in the middle of their entitled pool party. The image was so satisfying that she almost smiled. "How quickly can you install this?" "I can have a crew out tomorrow morning." That evening, Tasha noticed unusual activity in Sandra's yard. Through her bedroom window, she could see Sandra talking animatedly with several people in her backyard. They kept pointing toward Tasha's house, and at one point, Sandra actually walked to the fence line and appeared to be studying Tasha's property. Around 9 p.m., Tasha's doorbell rang. She looked through the peephole and saw Sandra standing on her front porch with two people Tasha didn't recognize: a middle-aged man in a polo shirt and a woman with a clipboard. Tasha opened the door, but kept the security chain engaged. "What do you want, Sandra?" "Hi, Tasha. These are my friends Bill and Margaret from the HOA board. We need to talk to you about some concerns that have been raised." Tasha's heart sank. The HOA. She should have seen this coming. "What concerns?" Tasha asked, though she already knew. Bill stepped forward, consulting a small notebook. "We've received complaints about excessive noise late at night, aggressive behavior toward neighbors, and possible harassment." "Harassment?" Tasha couldn't believe what she was hearing. "I'm harassing people who break into my yard." "Margaret." The woman with the clipboard spoke up. "We understand there's been some conflict over pool usage. The HOA encourages neighbors to work together to resolve these kinds of disputes amicably." "Pool usage," Tasha repeated. "There's no dispute over pool usage. It's my pool. I use it. End of discussion." Sandra jumped in, her voice sweet as poison. Tasha, we're just trying to find a solution that works for everyone. The community spirit in this neighborhood has always been so wonderful, and we hate to see neighbors fighting. Community spirit. Tasha opened the door wider, forgetting about the security chain for a moment. Sandra. Where was the community spirit when I had the flu? Where was it when my car broke down? Where was it when I needed help moving furniture? But now that you want to use my pool, suddenly we're all about community spirit. Bill consulted his notebook again. Mrs. Williams, the HOA bylaws do encourage neighborly cooperation and community engagement. Show me the bylaw that says I have to let neighbors use my private pool, Tasha challenged. The three exchanged glances. Margaret cleared her throat. Well, there's no specific bylaw about pools, but there are guidelines about maintaining harmony in the community. And there are also guidelines about trespassing, aren't there? Tasha shot back. And about respecting private property. Sandra's mask slipped again. Look, Tasha, we're trying to handle this quietly and reasonably. But if you keep making trouble, we might have to explore other options. Other options like what? Well, noise complaints, for instance. Disturbing the peace. Harassment charges. Tasha felt the familiar surge of anger, but this time it was mixed with something else: clarity. Sandra wasn't just entitled, she was manipulative. She'd brought HOA representatives to try to legitimize her ridiculous demands, and now she was threatening to file false complaints if Tasha didn't comply. You know what? Tasha said, stepping fully outside and closing her door behind her. Let's go look at my backyard right now. All of us. I want to show you something. The group followed her around the side of the house to her back gate. Tasha unlocked it and gestured for them to enter. This is my pool, she said, pointing to the sparkling water. This is my pool deck, my furniture, my pergola, and my landscaping. I paid for all of it. I maintain all of it. I'm liable for all of it. She walked over to her security camera and pointed directly at it. This camera recorded Sandra and 11 other people trespassing on this property 3 nights ago. They brought alcohol, they brought pool floats, they hung decorations on my pergola without permission, and they left trash all over my deck. Bill and Margaret looked uncomfortable. Sandra started to speak, but Tasha held up her hand. I'm not finished. That same camera recorded Sandra offering to pay maintenance costs in exchange for using my pool twice a week, which, by the way, would make this a commercial arrangement which violates both HOA bylaws and city zoning regulations. Margaret's eyes widened. She hadn't considered the legal implications of what Sandra was proposing. Furthermore, Tasha continued, my homeowner's insurance explicitly excludes coverage for unauthorized users. If someone gets hurt in my pool without permission, I could lose my house in a lawsuit. But Sandra thinks I should risk my financial security so she can throw pool parties. The silence stretched uncomfortably. Finally, Bill cleared his throat. Mrs. Mitchell, is it true that you brought alcohol onto Mrs. Williams's property without permission? Sandra's confident demeanor cracked. Well, I mean, it wasn't like a big party or anything. We were just being neighborly. And is it true that you proposed a regular arrangement to use her pool? We were trying to find a compromise. Margaret made a note on her clipboard. Mrs. Mitchell, the HOA, cannot and will not support any arrangement that involves regular access to another resident's private property without a formal legal agreement. What you're describing could constitute trespassing. Sandra's face flushed red. Are you serious? You're taking her side? We're not taking sides, Bill said firmly. We're stating HOA policy. Private property rights are fundamental to our community guidelines. As the HOA representatives left, Sandra lingered behind. The friendly mask was completely gone now, replaced by barely contained fury. You think you're so smart, she hissed. But this neighborhood is about more than just property rights. It's about being a good neighbor, and you're failing miserably at that. Being a good neighbor means respecting boundaries, Tasha replied calmly. Something you clearly don't understand. This isn't over, Sandra said, echoing her threat from the night before. There are other ways to handle this situation. Is that another threat? Sandra smiled, but it was cold and calculating. It's a promise. You can't hide behind your cameras and your security systems forever. Sooner or later, you're going to have to live in this neighborhood, and neighbors have long memories. After Sandra left, Tasha stood alone in her backyard, processing what had just happened. The situation had escalated beyond anything she could have imagined. Sandra wasn't just entitled, she was vindictive. And now she had allies. The next morning, Mike and his crew arrived to install the upgraded security system. As they worked, Tasha's phone rang constantly. First, it was her HOA management company asking for a written statement about the previous night's meeting. Then it was Officer Martinez informing her that Sandra had filed a counter-complaint alleging harassment. Harassment? Tasha asked. She claims you've been recording her without consent and threatening to file false police reports, Martinez explained. It's clearly retaliatory, but we have to investigate all complaints. So let me get this straight. She trespasses on my property repeatedly, and when I document it and press charges, she accuses me of harassment. That's about the size of it. The good news is that your video evidence pretty clearly shows what really happened. The bad news is that this is turning into a he said, she said situation, and those are always messy. As Mike's crew finished installing the motion-activated sprinklers, Tasha noticed Sandra watching from her bedroom window. She wasn't even trying to hide her surveillance anymore. Those sprinklers are going to surprise the hell out of whoever triggers them, Mike said with satisfaction. Motion sensor picks up anything bigger than a cat, and the water pressure is substantial. Not enough to hurt anyone, but definitely enough to ruin their day. What's the range? Tasha asked. About 15 feet in all directions. Someone could enter your backyard, but they're not going to make it to your pool without getting soaked. That afternoon, Tasha received an unexpected visitor. A woman in her 60s, impeccably dressed and carrying herself with obvious authority, knocked on her front door. Mrs. Williams, I'm Patricia Chen, president of the Sunrise Meadows HOA board. I understand there's been some confusion about community guidelines, and I wanted to clarify a few things personally. Tasha invited Patricia inside, grateful to finally talk to someone who seemed reasonable. First, Patricia said, settling into Tasha's living room chair. I want to apologize for last night's visit. Bill and Margaret are good volunteers, but they don't always handle delicate situations with the appropriate level of authority. Delicate situations? Patricia smiled, but it was the smile of someone who'd dealt with difficult people for years. Mrs. Williams, in my 20 years as HOA president, I've seen every kind of neighbor dispute imaginable. What Sandra Mitchell is doing is not neighborly cooperation, it's harassment. Tasha felt a wave of relief. Finally, someone in authority who understood the situation. The HOA board met this morning to discuss your situation, Patricia continued. We reviewed the video evidence you provided, and we've made several decisions. First, Sandra Mitchell is being issued a formal warning for violating community standards regarding respect for private property. And second, we're implementing a new policy regarding pool usage. Any arrangement involving regular access to another resident's private recreational facilities must be approved by the HOA board and documented with proper insurance and liability agreements. Tasha felt like hugging this woman. So Sandra can't just decide to use my pool whenever she wants? Absolutely not. And if she continues to trespass, the HOA will pursue legal action to protect the community's reputation. But Patricia wasn't finished. However, I do want to address something else. Sandra has been spreading rumors about your behavior, claiming that you're hostile to neighbors and unwilling to participate in community activities. Tasha's heart sank. What kind of rumors? She's telling people that you threatened her with violence, that you've been stalking her with cameras, and that you're trying to turn the neighborhood against her. None of that is true. I believe you, Patricia said. But perception matters in a community like this. I'd strongly recommend that you make an effort to engage positively with other neighbors. Attend some HOA meetings. Participate in community events. Don't let Sandra control the narrative about who you are. That evening, as Tasha was cleaning her pool, she heard voices in Sandra's backyard again. This time, the conversation was loud enough that she could make out actual words. "She thinks she's won," Sandra was saying. "But wait until she sees what happens next." "Are you sure this is a good idea?" another voice asked. Tasha thought it might be Jennifer from the book club. "Trust me," Sandra replied. "Sometimes you have to fight fire with fire." Tasha felt a chill run down her spine. Whatever Sandra was planning, it wasn't going to be good. Around midnight, Tasha was awakened by the sound of her motion-activated sprinklers engaging. She grabbed her phone and checked the security camera feed, expecting to see Sandra and her friends getting soaked as they tried to access her pool. Instead, what she saw made her blood run cold. 3 teenagers, none of whom she recognized, were standing in her backyard dripping wet from the sprinklers. But they weren't leaving. Instead, they were laughing and dancing in the water spray like it was a game. One of them, a girl who couldn't have been more than 16, was holding up her phone, recording herself getting sprayed by the motion sensors. "This is so cool," she squealed. "It's like a free water park." Tasha realized with dawning horror that Sandra had found a way to turn her security system against her. Instead of deterring trespassers, the sprinklers had become an attraction. As she watched, more teenagers appeared at her gate. Word was spreading, and her backyard was becoming a viral social media destination. Her pool war was about to enter a whole new phase. Tasha threw on her robe and rushed outside, her heart pounding as she watched more teenagers gathering at her gate. The sprinklers had activated again, soaking a group of kids who were now treating her backyard like some kind of amusement park. "Hey!" she shouted over the sound of spraying water. "This is private property." The teenagers looked at her like she was speaking a foreign language. The girl with the phone still recording actually had the audacity to wave. "Thanks for the awesome sprinkler system," she called out. "This is going to get so many likes." Tasha felt her world tilting. "Likes you're posting this online?" "Already went viral on TikTok," another teenager said, showing his phone screen. "Sandra's neighbor with the motion sprinklers. She's trending." Sandra. Of course Sandra was behind this. Tasha grabbed the nearest kid's phone and saw the video that was destroying her life in real time. The caption read, "Crazy neighbor lady installed motion sprinklers to keep us out. But joke's on her. Free water park. Come to Sunrise Meadows subdivision house with the blue pool, #sprinkler park, #Karen neighbor, #free water fun." The video already had over 10,000 views and hundreds of comments. Kids were tagging their friends, sharing the location, and planning to visit. Tasha's address was in the comment section. "Delete this," she demanded, but the teenager just laughed. "Can't delete something that's already been reposted like 50 times. More teenagers were arriving by the minute. Some came on foot, others were being dropped off by friends with cars. Tasha watched in horror as her quiet neighborhood street filled with young people treating her home like a tourist destination. The sprinklers couldn't keep up with the demand. Groups of kids were taking turns running through the motion sensors, shrieking with delight as they got soaked. Others were filming their friends, creating more content for social media. "This has got to stop," Tasha muttered, pulling out her phone to call the police. But before she could dial, Sandra appeared at the fence line, watching the chaos with obvious satisfaction. "Having some trouble with your security system?" Sandra called out sweetly. Tasha marched over to the fence, fury radiating from every pore. "You did this. You told these kids about the sprinklers." Sandra's smile was pure poison. "I have no idea what you're talking about. I was just mentioning to some neighbors how impressive your new security upgrades were. Word spreads fast in the digital age. You deliberately turned my security system into a social media attraction." "Did I? Or did you create this situation by being unreasonable about sharing community resources?" Before Tasha could respond, a new complication arrived. Two police cars pulled up in front of her house, their lights flashing. But they weren't there to help with the trespassing teenagers. Officer Martinez stepped out of the first car, followed by her partner, a stern-looking man Tasha didn't recognize. "Mrs. Williams," Martinez called out, "we need to talk to you about the harassment complaint filed against you." Tasha couldn't believe the timing. Harassment complaint. There are 15 teenagers trespassing on my property right now. Martinez looked around at the chaos, her expression shifting from official business to genuine confusion. "Ma'am, what exactly is happening here?" "My neighbor Sandra told kids on social media about my motion-activated sprinklers, and now they're treating my backyard like a public water park." The second officer, whose name tag read Johnson, stepped forward. "Mrs. Mitchell filed a complaint this afternoon alleging that you've been recording her without consent and making threats." "Recording her without consent? She's been trespassing on my property. And what threats?" Sandra had materialized beside the officers, playing the role of concerned victim perfectly. "Officer Johnson, I've tried to be patient with Tasha, but her behavior has become increasingly erratic. She installed cameras specifically to spy on my family, and yesterday she threatened to make me pay for using her pool." "That's not what happened," Tasha exploded. "She broke into my yard multiple times, brought groups of people to use my pool without permission, and when I refused to let her turn my pool into a community center, she started this social media campaign." Officer Martinez looked between the two women, clearly trying to piece together the real story. "Mrs. Williams, do you have video evidence of the alleged trespassing?" "Absolutely." Tasha pulled out her phone and started showing the officers the recorded incidents. But as they reviewed the footage, more teenagers kept arriving. The situation was spiraling completely out of control. Kids were now climbing over her fence instead of bothering with the gate, and someone had brought a Bluetooth speaker that was pumping out music loud enough to wake the entire neighborhood. "This is insane," Officer Johnson muttered, watching a group of teenagers take selfies in front of Tasha's house. Just then, Tasha's phone rang. The caller ID showed her insurance company. "Mrs. Williams, this is Rebecca from Sunset Insurance. We've received some concerning information about your property being used as an unauthorized recreational facility." Tasha's heart stopped. "What do you mean?" "We've been alerted to social media posts showing large groups of minors using your pool area. If you're operating some kind of commercial venture without proper permits and liability coverage, your homeowner's policy could be voided." "I'm not operating anything. These people are trespassing." "Ma'am, the video evidence suggests otherwise. We're going to need to send an investigator to assess the situation." Tasha hung up, feeling like she was drowning. Her insurance company thought she was running an illegal business, the police were investigating her for harassment, and her backyard was full of teenagers who thought they'd found a free amusement park. Sandra was watching everything with barely concealed glee. This was exactly what she'd wanted. Tasha overwhelmed, discredited, and desperate enough to agree to anything. "You know," Sandra said loudly enough for the officers to hear, "all of this could have been avoided if Tasha had just been willing to share. But some people are too selfish to be good neighbors." That comment triggered something in Officer Martinez. She'd been watching Sandra's performance, and her cop instincts were telling her something wasn't right. "Mrs. Mitchell," Martinez said slowly, "exactly how did these teenagers learn about Mrs. Williams' sprinkler system?" Sandra's confidence flickered for just a moment. "I have no idea. Kids talk, you know, word gets around." But they knew the specific address. They knew about the pool. They even knew the woman's name was Tasha. That's pretty specific information for random word of mouth. Tasha saw the opening and jumped on it. "Officer Martinez, I can show you Sandra's social media accounts. She's been posting about my pool for weeks." Before Sandra could object, Tasha pulled up Sandra's Facebook page on her phone. The evidence was damning photos of Tasha's pool taken from Sandra's yard posts, complaining about selfish neighbors who won't share community resources. And most damaging of all, a post from earlier that day that read, "Some people need to learn that selfishness has consequences. Sometimes the universe has a way of teaching lessons." Officer Johnson read the post over Martinez's shoulder, his expression darkening. "Mrs. Mitchell, this looks like you deliberately incited these people to trespass on your neighbor's property." "I did no such thing," Sandra protested, but her voice had lost its confident edge. "The timestamp on this post is 3 hours before the first teenagers arrived," Martinez pointed out. "And you specifically mentioned consequences for not sharing. That could be interpreted as incitement to harassment." The situation was shifting, but Tasha's problems were far from over. More teenagers continued to arrive, and now some of them were starting to get aggressive about their right to use the sprinklers. "Hey, lady," one boy shouted at Tasha, "you can't keep us from public water." "It's not public water," Tasha yelled back. "It's my private property. The internet says it's free for everyone." The misunderstanding was spreading faster than Tasha could correct it. Someone had apparently posted online that the sprinklers were a public attraction, and now kids thought they had some kind of legal right to access them. Patricia Chen, the HOA president, arrived just as the situation reached peak chaos. She took one look at the crowd of teenagers, the police cars, and Sandra's guilty expression, and immediately understood what had happened. "Officer Martinez," Patricia said, approaching, with the authority of someone used to solving problems. "I'm the HOA president. This situation is the result of a malicious campaign by Mrs. Mitchell to harass Mrs. Williams." "How do you know that?" Martinez asked. "Because Mrs. Mitchell was officially warned by the HOA board yesterday for trespassing on Mrs. Williams' property. This appears to be retaliation for our decision to support Mrs. Williams' property rights." Sandra's face went white. Having the HOA president as a witness against her changed everything. "Furthermore," Patricia continued, "Mrs. Mitchell has been spreading false information about HOA policies, claiming that private pool usage falls under community resource sharing. That's absolutely untrue." Officer Johnson was taking notes now. "So you're saying Mrs. Mitchell knowingly provided false information that led to this trespassing incident?" "That appears to be exactly what happened." But even as the adults sorted out the blame, the teenager situation was getting worse. Someone had brought beer, turning Tasha's backyard into an underage drinking party. The liability implications made Tasha's head spin. "I need everyone off my property right now," she announced loudly. A teenage boy with an obvious attitude problem stepped forward. "Make us. This is public property now. It's been claimed by the internet." "Claimed by the internet," Officer Martinez repeated. "Son, that's not how property law works." "Whatever, boomer. We're not leaving." That's when Tasha realized the teenagers weren't just treating her property like a public park. Some of them genuinely believed they had legal rights to be there. The misinformation was spreading as fast as the original video. Officer Martinez called for backup, but Tasha knew that even with more police, this wasn't going to be easy to resolve. The kids weren't just trespassing. They were convinced they were being victimized if anyone tried to make them leave. "This is what you wanted, isn't it, Sandra?" Tasha said, her voice carrying across the chaos. "You couldn't have my pool legally, so you decided to make sure nobody could enjoy it." Sandra started to deny it, but Patricia Chen cut her off. "Mrs. Mitchell, the HOA board, is calling an emergency meeting tomorrow morning. Your actions tonight have created a public safety hazard and potentially exposed our entire community to liability issues." "What are you talking about?" Sandra demanded. "If someone gets hurt on Mrs. Williams' property because of your social media campaign, the insurance implications could affect the entire neighborhood," Patricia explained. "Not to mention the property value's impact of having our subdivision turn into a social media destination for trespassing teenagers." Tasha hadn't even considered that angle. Sandra's vindictive campaign wasn't just hurting her, it was potentially damaging the entire community. More police arrived, and they began the slow process of clearing teenagers from Tasha's property. But as each group left, they were replaced by new arrivals who'd seen the social media posts. It was like trying to stop a flood with a bucket. "We need to get ahead of this online," Officer Martinez said, watching another carload of teenagers pull up. "The source of the misinformation needs to be addressed." Patricia had already thought of that. She was on her phone with someone from the city's social media management team, explaining the situation and requesting that they report the posts encouraging trespassing. But social media moved faster than official channels. While they were trying to get the original posts removed, new videos were being posted every few minutes, each one encouraging more people to visit the free sprinkler park. Sandra, realizing that she was about to face serious consequences for her actions, tried one last desperate gambit. "Officers, I want to file a complaint against Patricia Chen for HOA harassment," she announced. "She's clearly biased against me and is trying to silence my legitimate complaints about community resource sharing." Even Officer Johnson, who'd been relatively neutral, looked incredulous. "Ma'am, you just admitted to legitimate complaints about community resource sharing. Mrs. Williams' pool isn't a community resource." "In a true community, people share what they have with their neighbors," Sandra insisted. "Tasha's selfishness is what created this whole situation." Tasha felt something snap inside her. She'd been patient, she'd followed the rules, she'd tried to work within the system, and she was still being blamed for Sandra's criminal behavior. "You want to talk about selfishness?" Tasha said, her voice carrying clearly over the commotion. "Let's talk about selfishness, Sandra. When was the last time you offered to help a neighbor? When did you share your resources with the community?" "I don't have a pool," Sandra shot back. "You have a car. Have you offered rides to elderly neighbors? You have a big kitchen. Have you cooked meals for families going through hard times? You have a guest room. Have you offered temporary housing to anyone who needed it?" Sandra's mouth opened and closed without sound. "The only thing you want to share is something that belongs to someone else," Tasha continued. "That's not community spirit. That's entitlement." The crowd of remaining teenagers had gone quiet, sensing the adult drama unfolding. Even they could see that Sandra was being exposed as the real problem. But Tasha wasn't done. Weeks of violation, harassment, and escalation had built up inside her, and it was all coming out now. "You broke into my yard. You brought uninvited guests. You tried to extort me into giving you access to my property. You filed false complaints with the HOA and the police. And when all of that failed, you incited strangers to trespass on my property, potentially putting me at legal and financial risk." Her voice was rising with each accusation, and Sandra was shrinking back. "And through all of this, you've had the nerve to call me selfish. You've painted me as the bad neighbor. But what you've actually done is prove that you're a criminal who thinks other people's property exists for your convenience." Officer Martinez was watching this confrontation with great interest. In her experience, the truth usually came out when people got emotional enough to drop their masks. Furthermore, Tasha continued, now addressing the remaining teenagers as much as Sandra, "Every single person who came here tonight is trespassing. You don't get to decide that someone else's property is public just because you want to use it. The internet doesn't give you legal rights to private property." Some of the teenagers looked genuinely surprised. They'd apparently believed they were participating in some kind of legitimate social media trend, not committing criminal trespassing. "But the videos said it was free for everyone," one girl protested. "The videos lied," Officer Martinez said firmly. "This is private property, and everyone here without permission is breaking the law." As the police continued clearing her property, Tasha noticed that Sandra was quietly trying to slip away from the scene, but Patricia Chen was having none of it. "Mrs. Mitchell, you're not going anywhere until we finish documenting your role in tonight's events," Patricia said with authority. "The HOA board will need a complete report." Sandra stopped in her tracks, realizing she couldn't just walk away from the consequences of her actions. "I want a lawyer," Sandra announced suddenly. "That's your right," Officer Martinez said. But I should inform you that we're considering charges of incitement to trespass, filing false police reports, and potentially criminal harassment." The color drained from Sandra's face. She'd expected her plan to force Tasha into submission, not land herself in legal trouble. But even as Sandra faced potential criminal charges, Tasha's problems weren't over. Her insurance company was still investigating property values in the neighborhood could be affected by the social media attention, and there was no guarantee that removing the online posts would stop people from showing up. "What am I supposed to do if more people keep coming?" Tasha asked Officer Martinez. "We're going to post an officer here overnight to discourage any additional attempts," Martinez replied. "And we're working with social media platforms to get the false information removed." "But what about tomorrow and next week? Once something goes viral, it takes on a life of its own." Patricia Chen had been thinking about the same problem. Tasha, the HOA has emergency funds for situations that affect community welfare. "We're going to hire private security for your property until this dies down." It was the first piece of genuinely good news Tasha had heard all night. But as she looked around her backyard, now littered with trash from the teenage invasion, she realized that Sandra had succeeded in destroying her peace, even if she'd failed to get access to the pool. The sanctuary that Tasha had worked so hard to create and protect was gone, possibly forever. Even after the criminal charges were filed and the social media posts were removed, would she ever again be able to sit by her pool in the morning, with her coffee, enjoying the quiet solitude that had meant so much to her? Sandra might face legal consequences for her actions, but the damage to Tasha's life felt irreversible. Her private retreat had become a public spectacle, and there was no easy way to undo that transformation. As the last of the teenagers were cleared from her property, and Sandra was escorted to a police car for questioning, Tasha stood alone in her devastated backyard, wondering if her victory in the pool war had come at the cost of everything she'd been fighting to protect. The morning after Sandra's arrest brought no relief to Tasha's situation. She woke to the sound of car doors slamming and voices outside her bedroom window. Peering through the blinds, she saw 3 news vans parked on her street, their satellite dishes extended like mechanical flowers reaching for the sky. "Oh no," she whispered, her heart sinking as she realized the social media attention had attracted local news outlets. A reporter with perfectly styled hair was standing in front of her house, speaking into a microphone while a cameraman filmed. Tasha couldn't hear the words, but she could see the headlines scrolling across her phone. "Neighborhood pool war turns viral, woman arrested for inciting teen trespassing spree." Her phone had been buzzing all night with notifications. Text messages from numbers she didn't recognize. Friend requests on social media platforms she barely used, and missed calls from reporters wanting interviews. The pool war had officially become a national news story. A knock at her front door made her jump. Through the peephole, she saw Patricia Chen holding 2 coffee cups and looking exhausted. "Thank God," Tasha said, opening the door and quickly ushering Patricia inside before the reporters could spot them. "I brought caffeine," Patricia said, handing Tasha one of the cups, "because we're going to need it. The situation has gotten significantly more complicated overnight." "More complicated how?" Patricia pulled out her tablet and showed Tasha a series of news articles. The story has been picked up by national outlets: CNN, Fox News, NBC. They're calling it the Great American Pool War and using it as a symbol of everything from property rights to social media mob mentality to generational conflict. Tasha scrolled through the headlines, each one making her feel sicker. "Karen neighbor calls cops on teens having fun," versus "entitled neighbors steal woman's pool," versus "social media mob destroys quiet neighborhood." The narratives are completely different depending on which outlet is reporting, Patricia continued. Some are painting you as a victim of harassment, others are making you look like a villain who called the police on innocent kids. But what about Sandra? What about the evidence of her inciting the trespassing? Sandra's story is getting buried in the larger narrative. The arrest happened too late in the evening for most news cycles, so the initial reports focused on the teenagers and the viral videos. As if summoned by their conversation, Tasha's phone rang. The caller ID showed a number with a Los Angeles area code. "Don't answer it," Patricia advised. "I've been getting calls all morning from talk shows, podcasts, and documentary filmmakers. Everyone wants to book the people involved in the viral pool story." But even as Patricia spoke, another problem was developing outside. A small crowd had gathered across the street from Tasha's house, holding signs and chanting. Tasha could make out words like "share" and "community," but couldn't read the full messages from her window. "Are those protesters?" Tasha asked incredulously. Patricia looked outside and cursed under her breath. "This is exactly what I was afraid of. The story has been politicized. People are taking sides without knowing the actual facts." The chanting grew louder, and now Tasha could hear what they were saying. "Pools for people, not profit. Pools for people, not profit." "They think I'm running some kind of business?" Tasha asked. "The initial social media posts were unclear about the details," Patricia explained. "Some people think you were charging kids to use your sprinklers. Others think you're refusing to let the community use a public pool. The facts got lost in the viral telephone game." A new complication arrived in the form of Officer Martinez, who had to push through the crowd of protesters and reporters to reach Tasha's front door. "Mrs. Williams," Martinez said when Tasha let her in, "we need to discuss your safety. The situation has escalated beyond a simple neighbor dispute." "My safety? You've been receiving threats," Martinez said grimly. "People who've seen the viral videos and news coverage are posting your address online and making threats against your property and person." Tasha felt the world tilt. "What kind of threats?" "Everything from people threatening to break down your fence to more serious personal threats. We're taking them seriously because crowd mentalities can turn dangerous quickly." As if to emphasize the point, the chanting outside grew louder and more aggressive. Someone had apparently brought a megaphone. "What am I supposed to do?" Tasha asked. "I can't leave my own house." "We're recommending that you consider staying elsewhere for a few days while this dies down," Martinez said. "The department is also going to increase patrols in the neighborhood, but we can't guarantee your safety with this level of public attention." Patricia spoke up. "The HOA has already arranged for private security around Tasha's property, but Officer Martinez is right. The scale of this situation is beyond what we initially planned for." Just then, Tasha's phone buzzed with a call from her insurance company. The caller ID made her stomach drop. It was the claims investigation department. "Mrs. Williams, this is David from Sunset Insurance. We need to schedule an emergency inspection of your property. The viral videos and news coverage have created some serious liability concerns." "What kind of concerns?" Tasha asked, though she was afraid to hear the answer. "If your property has become a public attraction even temporarily, your homeowner's policy may not cover injuries that occur there. We need to assess whether you're operating outside the scope of residential coverage." "I'm not operating anything." "People are trespassing." "Ma'am, from an insurance perspective, the cause of the attraction is less important than the fact that your property is attracting large crowds. That changes the risk profile significantly." After hanging up, Tasha slumped into her chair, overwhelmed by the cascade of consequences from Sandra's revenge campaign. "This is insane," she said. 2 weeks ago, my biggest problem was someone using my pool without permission. Now I'm receiving death threats, and my insurance company thinks I'm running an illegal business." Patricia's phone rang, and after a brief conversation, her expression grew even more serious. "That was the city," she said. "They're sending code enforcement to inspect your property. Someone filed a complaint claiming you're operating an unpermitted recreational facility." "Based on what evidence?" "The viral video showing large groups of people using your backyard. Without context, it could look like a commercial operation." The sound of breaking glass from outside made all 3 women freeze. Through the window they could see that someone in the crowd had thrown something at the news van, and the situation was deteriorating rapidly. "That's it," Officer Martinez said, reaching for her radio. I'm calling for crowd control backup. This is becoming a public safety issue." As Martinez coordinated with dispatch, Patricia received another phone call that made her face go pale. "The mayor's office," she said after hanging up. "They want to hold an emergency town hall meeting tonight to address the community resource sharing controversy before it gets further out of hand." "Community resource sharing controversy," Tasha repeated. "Is that what they're calling this?" "Politicians love to reframe issues in ways that don't assign blame," Patricia said grimly. "But a town hall meeting means this story is going to get even bigger." The crowd outside was growing larger and more vocal. Someone had brought drums, and the rhythmic chanting was becoming hypnotic and increasingly aggressive. Tasha could see people holding up phones live streaming the protest and adding more fuel to the viral fire. "I need to get out of here," Tasha said, suddenly feeling claustrophobic in her own home. "Where will you go?" Patricia asked. "I don't know. A hotel, maybe. My sister lives in Tucson. Somewhere these people can't find me." But even as she said it, Tasha realized the futility of running away. Her address was already public knowledge, her face was on the news, and leaving would only make her look guilty of something. Officer Martinez finished her radio call and turned back to them. "Backup is en route, but I have some news about Sandra Mitchell that might interest you." "What kind of news?" "She made bail this morning, and within an hour she was giving interviews to news outlets. She's claiming that she's the real victim here, that you've been harassing her family for months, and that the teenagers were just innocent kids trying to have fun." Tasha felt her blood pressure spike. "She's lying. Everything is documented on video. I know that, and you know that, but the general public doesn't know that. Sandra's story is much simpler and more sympathetic than the complex truth. She's positioning herself as a concerned neighbor who was trying to bring the community together." Patricia was checking her tablet again, and her expression grew increasingly troubled. "Sandra's interviews are getting more coverage than the arrest story. She's very media savvy, and she's controlling the narrative." A new arrival outside caught their attention. A large RV with satellite equipment was parking across the street, and people were setting up what looked like a mobile broadcast studio. "Is that a network news truck?" Tasha asked. Officer Martinez squinted through the window. "Looks like it. This story must be getting national pickup." Tasha's phone rang again, this time showing a number with a New York area code. "Don't answer it," Patricia warned, but Tasha was beyond caring about media management strategy. "Hello. Mrs. Williams, this is Jessica Chen from Good Morning America. We'd love to have you on the show tomorrow to tell your side of the pool controversy. We can arrange transportation and—" Tasha hung up without responding. Within seconds, the phone rang again. This time it was a producer from a late-night talk show. "This is never going to stop," she said, powering off her phone entirely. But the digital siege was just beginning. Patricia's tablet was showing real-time social media feeds, and the hashtags related to Tasha's story were trending nationally. Hashtag Pool Wars, hashtag Karen Neighbor, hashtag Property Rights, and hashtag Community Sharing were all generating thousands of posts per minute. "Look at this," Patricia said, showing Tasha a particularly viral tweet. "Someone created a meme using your security camera footage. It shows you yelling at the teenagers with the caption, 'When you're trying to protect your property, but the internet has other plans.'" The meme had been retweeted over 50,000 times in the past hour. Tasha's face, frozen in a moment of anger and frustration, was becoming a symbol for various political and social viewpoints she'd never even considered. "I didn't ask for any of this," Tasha said, feeling tears of frustration building. "I just wanted to swim in my own pool, without uninvited guests." A commotion outside drew their attention back to the window. The protesters and news crews were reacting to something, and people were pointing toward Sandra's house. Sandra had emerged from her front door and was walking toward the crowd with the confidence of someone who knew she was about to steal the spotlight. She was dressed perfectly for television, professional but approachable, with just enough casual styling to seem relatable. "She's going to hold a press conference," Patricia realized. right here in the neighborhood." They watched as Sandra positioned herself in front of the largest news camera and began speaking. Even through the closed windows, they could hear her measured, sympathetic tone. "I never wanted this situation to escalate like this," Sandra was saying. "All I ever hoped for was to build a stronger sense of community in our neighborhood. When I saw my neighbor struggling to maintain such a large pool all by herself, I thought maybe we could work together to share the responsibility and the joy." "That's not what happened," Tasha exploded. But of course, Sandra couldn't hear her. Sandra continued her performance with practiced ease. "I understand that property rights are important, but so is community spirit. What happened last night with those poor teenagers was a tragedy that could have been avoided if we'd all just been willing to compromise and work together." The crowd was eating it up. Sandra had positioned herself as the reasonable peacemaker, trying to bring neighbors together, while the unreasonable Tasha had called the police on innocent kids just trying to have fun. "She's rewriting history in real time," Patricia said, with grudging admiration for Sandra's media skills. "And it's working." Officer Martinez's radio crackled with an update that made her expression darken. "Mrs. Williams, I need to inform you that we've received multiple reports of people planning to protest at your house tonight. The permits for the town hall meeting have also been approved, which means this story is going to get even more attention." "How many people?" Tasha asked. "The social media chatter suggests hundreds, possibly thousands. This has apparently become a rallying point for multiple different causes." Tasha felt like she was drowning in the absurdity of it all. Her simple desire to protect her property had somehow become a national controversy about community values, property rights, social media responsibility, and generational conflict. "I have to get ahead of this somehow," she said. "Sandra is controlling the narrative because she's the only one talking to the media." "Are you sure you want to engage with the press?" Patricia asked. "Sometimes the best strategy is to let controversial stories die down naturally." "This isn't dying down naturally. It's growing exponentially. And every hour that I stay silent, Sandra's version of events becomes more entrenched as the truth." Officer Martinez looked concerned. "If you do decide to make a public statement, we strongly recommend doing it from a secure location with security present. The emotions around this issue are running very high." As they debated Tasha's options, a new development occurred outside. A second RV had arrived, this one from a competing network. The media attention was creating its own momentum, with news outlets competing for exclusive access to the story. Sandra, clearly loving the attention, was now giving a second interview to the newly arrived crew. She'd positioned herself as the expert on the situation, the neighbor who understood both sides and was trying to find a reasonable solution. "She's building a media career out of destroying my life," Tasha said bitterly. Patricia's tablet chimed with a new alert. "The town hall meeting tonight has been moved to the high school auditorium because of expected attendance. They're estimating over 1,000 people might show up. 1,000 people want to debate whether I should be forced to share my pool." "It's not really about your pool anymore," Patricia said gently. "It's about everything the pool represents. Property rights versus community values. Individual freedom versus collective responsibility. Traditional neighborhood boundaries versus modern sharing economy principles." Tasha realized with dawning horror that her personal conflict with Sandra had become a proxy war for much larger cultural and political battles. People weren't really arguing about her pool. They were arguing about their vision of how society should work. "I never wanted to be a symbol," she said quietly. "None of us get to choose what we become symbols of," Officer Martinez replied. "But you do get to choose how you respond to it." A knock at the door interrupted their conversation. Through the peephole, Tasha could see a well-dressed woman she didn't recognize, flanked by two men in suits. "Mrs. Williams," the woman called through the door. "I'm Sarah Thompson from the American Property Rights Foundation. We'd like to offer you our support in your fight against community property seizure." Tasha looked at Patricia and Officer Martinez in confusion. Community property seizure. Don't open the door, Martinez warned. This situation is attracting advocacy groups from all sides. You're about to become a battleground for every property rights organization in the country. Indeed, even as Sarah Thompson waited on the porch, another group was approaching from the street. These carried signs reading, "Housing is a human right," and "Community pools for community kids." The irony wasn't lost on Tasha. She'd spent weeks trying to keep unwanted people out of her backyard, and now her front yard was becoming a gathering place for every activist group with an agenda remotely related to property, community, or sharing. "This is spiraling completely out of control," she said, watching through the window as the two advocacy groups began arguing with each other on her lawn. Patricia was fielding phone calls continuously now. "The HOA board is calling an emergency meeting," she said after hanging up from the latest call. "The situation is affecting property values throughout the subdivision, and homeowners are demanding action." "What kind of action?" "Some want the HOA to support you completely and condemn Sandra's actions. Others think you should be required to allow limited community access to prevent future conflicts. And a few are suggesting that pools should be banned entirely from new construction to avoid similar situations." The simple neighbor dispute had become a policy debate that could affect every homeowner in the community. Tasha's private fight was now everyone's problem. Officer Martinez received a radio update that made her reach for her equipment. Additional units are being deployed to the neighborhood. The crowd size is approaching the threshold for requiring riot control preparation. Riot control. Tasha couldn't believe what she was hearing. When you get enough people together around a controversial issue, especially one that's been amplified by social media, things can turn violent very quickly. We're not expecting trouble, but we're preparing for it. As if to underscore the point, the chanting outside had grown louder and more organized. Someone had apparently taught the crowd a more complex chant. Whose pools? Our pools. Whose neighborhood? Our neighborhood. The entitlement that had started with Sandra had now spread to hundreds of strangers who felt they had some kind of claim on Tasha's property and community. The viral nature of the story had transformed individual greed into collective action. Sandra, still holding court with the media, was encouraging the crowd's energy while maintaining her image as a reasonable peacemaker. She was a master manipulator. Tasha realized someone who could incite conflict while appearing to seek resolution. "I need to fight back," Tasha said suddenly. "I can't let her control this narrative completely." "How?" Patricia asked. "I'm going to talk to the media. Right now, before tonight's town hall meeting. I'm going to tell the truth about what really happened with evidence to back it up." Officer Martinez looked skeptical. "Are you sure that's wise? Once you engage with this media circus, there's no going back. Your life will never be private again." Tasha looked out at the crowd of strangers debating her fate on her own lawn, at the news trucks broadcasting her story to the nation, at Sandra performing for the cameras while destroying Tasha's reputation. "My life is already not private," she said. "The question is whether I'm going to let lies define my story or whether I'm going to fight for the truth." Tasha walked to her front door with the determination of someone who had finally reached her breaking point. Patricia and Officer Martinez tried to stop her, but she was done hiding in her own home while Sandra orchestrated her character assassination. "Mrs. Williams, wait," Martinez called out, but Tasha was already opening the door. The moment she stepped outside, camera flashes exploded like lightning and microphones thrust toward her face like weapons. The crowd of protesters, reporters, and curious onlookers surged forward, creating a wall of noise and movement that nearly knocked her backward. "Mrs. Williams, Channel 7 News. Can you comment on the allegations that you've been harassing your neighbors? Fox 10, here. Is it true you called police on children just for swimming? Are you planning to sue the teenagers who used your property?" Tasha raised her hand, and surprisingly, the crowd quieted slightly. She could see Sandra across the lawn, her confident expression faltering as she realized her victim was about to speak for herself. "I want to make one thing very clear. Tasha said, her voice carrying across the yard. Everything that has happened here is the result of one person's refusal to respect basic property rights and her subsequent campaign of revenge when I wouldn't give her what she wanted. She pulled out her phone and held it up. I have video evidence of every incident. Sandra Mitchell trespassed on my property multiple times, brought uninvited groups to use my pool, tried to extort me into giving her access, and when I refused, she deliberately incited strangers on social media to trespass on my property. A reporter shouted over the crowd, "But what about the teenagers? They say you threatened them." "I told trespassers to leave my property," Tasha replied firmly. "That's not a threat. That's a property owner exercising her legal rights." Sandra pushed through the crowd, her media-friendly mask slipping as she realized she was losing control of the narrative. "Tasha, you're making this much worse than it needs to be." "Am I, Sandra? Because from where I'm standing, you turned a simple boundary dispute into a national news story. You brought protesters to my neighborhood. You incited teenagers to commit crimes on my property. How exactly am I making this worse?" The crowd was growing larger by the minute, and Tasha could see that some people were live-streaming her impromptu press conference. Her words were being broadcast to thousands of people in real time. "The truth is simple," Tasha continued, addressing the cameras directly. "I worked 2 jobs for 15 years to afford my home and pool. Sandra Mitchell decided she wanted to use my pool without my permission. When I said no, she tried to destroy my life." A woman in the crowd shouted, "Pools should be shared with the community." Tasha turned toward the voice. "Ma'am, do you share your car with strangers? Do you let people you don't know sleep in your bed? Property ownership means you get to decide who uses your property. That's not selfish. That's fundamental to how our society works." But even as Tasha spoke, she could see that the crowd was divided. Some people were nodding in agreement, while others looked increasingly hostile. The issue had become so politicized that facts weren't enough to change minds. Sandra, sensing an opportunity, stepped forward with her practiced, sympathetic expression. "Tasha, I understand you're upset, but look around you. Look at what your refusal to compromise has created. This whole neighborhood is in chaos because you couldn't find it in your heart to share." The audacity of the statement took Tasha's breath away. "Share, Sandra. When have you ever shared anything with me? You want to know what sharing looks like? Last month, my elderly neighbor, Mr. Peterson, had a stroke. I took him meals every day for 2 weeks and helped arrange his home care. That's sharing. That's community." She gestured toward Sandra. "But Sandra, she complained to the HOA when I helped Mr. Peterson by mowing his lawn, saying the grass was too short according to neighborhood standards." The crowd murmured, and Tasha could see some people's expressions changing. She was finally getting to tell her side of the story. "Real community means helping when people need help," Tasha continued. "It doesn't mean demanding access to other people's property for your own entertainment." A reporter from the national news crew pushed forward. "Mrs. Williams' critics are saying that your actions represent a broader problem with American individualism. How do you respond to that?" Tasha looked directly into the camera. "I respond by saying that protecting your property isn't individualism. It's responsibility. I'm responsible for the insurance on this pool. I'm responsible for the maintenance. I'm responsible if someone gets hurt. But somehow I'm supposed to give up control over something I'm completely responsible for." Patricia had emerged from the house and was standing behind Tasha, providing silent support. Officer Martinez was coordinating with the backup units that had arrived to manage the growing crowd. But Sandra wasn't ready to concede defeat. She'd spent too much time building her victim narrative to let it be destroyed by facts. "Everyone can see what's happening here," Sandra announced to the crowd. "Tasha is trying to make herself look like the victim, but she's the one who escalated every situation. She's the one who called the police. She's the one who refused to find a compromise." "Compromise?" Tasha repeated incredulously. "Sandra, what exactly did you offer to compromise? You demanded access to my pool twice a week and every other weekend. You offered to help with maintenance costs. That's not compromise. That's extortion with a payment plan. The crowd was becoming more agitated with different factions arguing among themselves. Some were chanting pro-property rights slogans, while others were demanding community access to private pools. A teenage girl pushed to the front of the crowd, her phone held high as she live-streamed. "Mrs. Williams, don't you think it's unfair that you have this huge pool when kids in the apartments don't have anywhere to swim?" Tasha looked at the girl, seeing genuine confusion rather than malice. "Sweetie, life isn't fair. I don't have a yacht, but I don't demand to use other people's boats. I don't have a tennis court, but I don't break into the country club. We all have different things because we work for different things. But water should be free for everyone." "Water is free," Tasha replied patiently. "The pool, the chemicals, the heating, the insurance, the maintenance, those aren't free. Someone has to pay for them. And that someone is me." Sandra jumped on the exchange. "See? This is exactly the attitude that's dividing our community. I paid for it, so it's only mine. What happened to helping your neighbors?" Tasha felt her temper flaring again. "Sandra, help me understand something. You live in a 4-bedroom house with just you and your husband. When was the last time you offered to let homeless families stay in your extra bedrooms? You have a 3-car garage, but only 2 cars. When did you last offer garage space to neighbors who don't have covered parking?" Sandra's mouth opened and closed without sound. "You want to talk about helping neighbors?" Tasha continued. "When Mrs. Chen from the end of the street needed rides to chemotherapy, who drove her? When the Johnson family's house flooded, who organized the cleanup crew? When teenagers were vandalizing mailboxes, who stayed up all night watching the neighborhood?" Patricia stepped forward, seeing an opportunity to support Tasha's defense. "For the record, the answer to all those questions is Tasha Williams. She's been the most helpful neighbor in this community for years." "But she won't share her pool," someone in the crowd shouted. "Because sharing your pool isn't the same as sharing a cup of sugar," Tasha shot back. "It's ongoing liability, it's legal responsibility, it's insurance implications, and it's giving up control of your private space to strangers." The argument was growing more heated, and Officer Martinez was looking increasingly concerned about crowd control. More police units had arrived, and they were setting up barriers to keep the situation from spilling into the street. Just then, a commotion at the edge of the crowd drew everyone's attention. A black SUV had pulled up, and several people in business attire were getting out. "Who are they?" Tasha asked Patricia. Before anyone could answer, one of the newcomers stepped forward with obvious authority. He was a tall man, in an expensive suit, carrying himself like someone accustomed to being in charge. "Ladies and gentlemen," he called out in a voice trained to command attention. "I'm Robert Sterling, attorney for Mrs. Williams, and I have some information that's going to change everything about this story." The crowd quieted, sensing a major development. Even the reporters stopped their side conversations to focus on this new player. Sandra looked nervous for the first time all day. "I don't know who you are, but—" "Mrs. Mitchell," Sterling interrupted smoothly. "You might want to hear what I have to say before you speak again, because everything you've said today is about to become evidence in multiple criminal and civil cases." Tasha was as confused as everyone else. She hadn't hired an attorney, and she had no idea who this man was, or why he was claiming to represent her. Sterling opened a briefcase and pulled out several manila folders. "Mrs. Williams, my firm has been retained by your insurance company to investigate this situation. What we've discovered is that Mrs. Mitchell's actions constitute not just criminal harassment, but insurance fraud." "Insurance fraud?" Sandra's voice cracked slightly. "Mrs. Mitchell, you filed a claim with your homeowner's insurance last week, alleging that Mrs. Williams has been harassing you and your family, creating a hostile environment that has damaged your property values." Sandra's face went pale. That's not exactly what I said." "Actually, it's exactly what you said. We have the recorded phone call." Sterling held up a small device. "But more interestingly, we also have evidence that you've been planning this entire campaign for weeks." He opened one of the folders, and pulled out printed screenshots. These are text messages between you and your friend Jennifer dating back 3 weeks ago, discussing plans to teach that selfish witch a lesson and make her life so miserable she'll beg us to use her pool. The crowd was dead silent now. Even the reporters had stopped asking questions, sensing that they were about to witness something much bigger than a neighbor dispute. Mrs. Mitchell, Sterling continued, you also posted on a private Facebook group called Dealing with Difficult Neighbors, asking for advice on how to force someone to share community resources. The responses included suggestions to use social media to create public pressure, file false complaints with various agencies, and organize protests. Sandra was backing away from the attorney, but there was nowhere to go in the crowded yard. The most damaging evidence, Sterling said, opening another folder, is your coordination with certain members of this crowd. Mrs. Mitchell, you've been in contact with professional activists who specialize in property rights protests. This isn't a spontaneous community uprising. It's an orchestrated harassment campaign. Tasha felt the ground shifting beneath her feet. She'd thought Sandra was just a vindictive neighbor, but apparently she was dealing with something much more calculated and sinister. Furthermore, Sterling continued, Mrs. Mitchell's insurance claim alleging harassment by Mrs. Williams is contradicted by her own social media posts encouraging people to trespass on Mrs. Williams' property. That's insurance fraud, which is a felony. Officer Martinez stepped forward, her hand moving toward her handcuffs. Mrs. Mitchell, you're going to need to come with us for additional questioning. Wait. Sandra's composed facade finally cracked completely. This is all being blown out of proportion. I was just trying to bring the community together. By committing multiple felonies, Sterling asked mildly. But even as Sandra was being led away in handcuffs for the second time in 2 days, the crowd wasn't dispersing. If anything, the revelation that some of the protesters were professional activists made the organic protesters more determined to prove their legitimacy. This doesn't change the fundamental issue, someone shouted. Rich people hoarding resources while others go without. Tasha realized that Sandra's arrest wouldn't end the controversy. The story had taken on a life of its own, and removing the instigator wouldn't make the larger movement disappear. Sterling seemed to read her thoughts. Mrs. Williams, my firm is prepared to pursue legal action against anyone who continues to trespass on your property or incite others to do so. We're also filing civil suits against Mrs. Mitchell for damages against the social media platforms for failing to remove content encouraging criminal activity, and against any advocacy groups that are using this situation to raise funds without disclosing their involvement. The scope of legal action he was describing was staggering. Tasha's simple desire to protect her pool had mushroomed into a multi-front legal war involving criminal charges, civil suits, insurance fraud, and First Amendment issues. I never wanted any of this, Tasha said quietly. None of us choose the battles that find us, Sterling replied. But once you're in the fight, you might as well win it decisively. As Sandra was loaded into a police car and the professional activists quietly melted away from the crowd, the remaining protesters seemed less certain of their cause. Without Sandra's manipulation and the activists' organization, the movement was losing its focus and energy. But Tasha knew the damage to her life was already done. Her face was now known to millions of people, her address was public knowledge, and she'd become a symbol in culture wars she'd never wanted to join. Patricia approached as the crowd began to thin. The town hall meeting has been canceled, she said. Apparently the mayor's office decided that with new criminal charges being filed, it would be inappropriate to hold a public forum on the issue. What happens now? Tasha asked. Now you reclaim your life, Sterling said firmly. My firm will handle all the legal matters. We'll pursue maximum damages against everyone who participated in this harassment campaign, and we'll make sure the legal consequences are severe enough to deter anyone from trying something similar in the future. As the news crews packed up their equipment and the last of the protesters drifted away, Tasha found herself standing in her front yard with just Patricia and Officer Martinez. "It's over," Martinez said. "The immediate crisis anyway. Sandra will face multiple felony charges, and the legal precedent should protect other homeowners from similar campaigns." Tasha looked at her house, her pool visible in the backyard, and tried to imagine returning to her old quiet life. But she knew that was impossible. The pool war had changed everything permanently. "I need to make one more statement," she said suddenly. Patricia looked concerned. "Are you sure the media attention might die down faster if you stay quiet now?" "No," Tasha said firmly. "People need to understand what really happened here. Not just the facts, but the principle." She walked to the edge of her property where a few reporters were still lingering and spoke loudly enough for her voice to carry. "Everyone who's been following this story needs to understand something important," she said. "This was never about sharing or community or helping neighbors. This was about one person's refusal to accept that no is a complete sentence." She gestured toward her house. "I worked for everything I have. I sacrificed for it. I take responsibility for it. And that gives me the right to decide how it's used. That's not selfishness. That's how freedom works." Her voice grew stronger as she continued. "When we stop protecting individual property rights because it seems more fair to redistribute things, we're not creating community. We're creating chaos. And when we use social media mobs to force people to give up what they've earned, we're not promoting justice. We're promoting theft." The few remaining reporters were filming intently, sensing that this was the soundbite that would define the story's conclusion. "Sandra Mitchell tried to steal my peace, my security, and my property rights," Tasha said. "She failed. And anyone who tries to do something similar to anyone else will fail too. Because there are still laws in this country, and there are still people willing to defend them." As the last news van pulled away and silence finally returned to her neighborhood, Tasha walked to her backyard and stood beside her pool. The water was crystal clear, reflecting the Arizona sky like a blue mirror. For the first time in weeks, she sat in her poolside chair with her coffee and watched the sun dance across the water. The peace she'd fought so hard to protect was hers again, but it felt different now. It was earned peace, defended peace, peace that had cost her something to keep. Sandra's house next door was dark and empty with a for sale sign already planted in the front yard. The legal fees, criminal charges, and public humiliation had apparently convinced her that a fresh start somewhere else was her best option. Tasha had won her pool war, but the victory felt complicated. She'd protected her property rights and exposed the truth about Sandra's manipulative campaign, but she'd also become a reluctant public figure in battles she'd never wanted to join. Her phone buzzed with another interview request, which she deleted without reading. The pool war was over, and Tasha Williams was ready to return to her private life as a victorious defender of the simple principle that some things in this world still belong to the people who paid for them. The water was warm, the coffee was strong, and for the first time in a month, Tasha Williams was truly alone in her own backyard, exactly as she'd always intended it to be.